Vince. Probably keep it. Mine doesn't work very well either. Only use it once a month. About ready? We'll give you two. I don't think so.
What about these two?
Okay.
I want to change seats with Vince.
Kurt, how we doing with everything? Is the video up and running? Let's go ahead and, yeah, do you want to go ahead and hit record, or is it? We good? Perfect. Well, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. As you can see, we've got a few new toys, cameras and microphones and everything to make it not only good for the people that are here, but good for those that are watching. They can hear and see what we're doing here. So adds to the transparency of what we're doing. And I think the next sum of COVID money that we spend ought to be for a larger council chambers so we can socially distance. And I know on camera it looks like everyone's kind of close, but they're at least 6 feet apart, just for the record.
Except for family, right?
That's right. So, roll call. Everyone is here tonight. We're not missing anyone, so appreciate everybody being here. We've asked our city manager, Scott Finlayson, to give us an opening prayer. and then we'll have a pledge of allegiance. That so. And to the republic. With liberty and justice. So to begin, we'll go ahead and look at the minutes from the last meeting. Any amendments or corrections that need to be made to those? Seeing none, would entertain a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Motion by Councilman White and second by Councilman Busenbark. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We have a public comment period at this time, 15 minutes, so any individual may take up to 3 minutes if they so desire. We ask that you come to the podium and state your name for the record. Are there any in our audience that would like to take that opportunity tonight? Seeing none, we'll move forward. So our first item we have tonight, and I see many of them here, is our Veteran Flag Committee Awards. Now, Drew, is that you that's going to take charge of that? All right, we'll turn the time over to you.
Money was raised by donations, hardware, paints, and flags. Volunteer group, along with generous donations of equipment, time, and manpower. Jack, Gary Rohr, Keith Hansen, and Beverly Hansen, 3 of whom are veterans. Dean Bruff, Gary Rohr, and Keith Hansen. Present members of the committee include 5 of the original group, Dean Bruff, $5.
That deserves a clap. So, I noticed, I was young when those flags first went in. I thought that was one of the coolest things to drive by on Highway 40 and see that lined with the American flag. So appreciate all that you do in behalf of the city. And Lee, would you make sure that that gets on our Facebook page? Sure. I'd love to. We're going to have to clear out a little bit, and everyone, Drew, do you have a list? And I imagine let's just go ahead and read their names off, have them come up and stand, and we'll put them in a line here, and then we'll get that picture. Right there is great. You two might have to come up. Come on up.
Guys.
Thank you so much. See you, Gary.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Let's move on to, let's see, I saw Will. There he is. Will, talking about the Brownsfield grants that So if you see a blighted area in the city or in the county that may have environmental contaminant, whether it be oil, gas, asbestos, whatever it may be, you can use those funds to do your phase
Hello,
one,
Kurt.
phase two environmental studies, which will at least help identify what you have and what steps you need to take to move forward, which can cost 20 to 40,000 depending on project and the scope of the project. But so it doesn't take care of all the remediation, but it does get you a good start on knowing what you're facing. Another question, Will, I don't know if you can. You say, well, I think the money's to use it or lose it. So if we don't use it by August, it'll revoke the grant. So how much money do we have left in that grant fund? It's good to know. Yeah,
Just a quick question. Can this money be used like if the city owned a piece of property that had some contaminated stuff, like maybe asbestos or something like that?
Yes.
Main Street, Roosevelt City does. Have we applied for a Brownsville phase one, phase two on that? Something that maybe we don't want to know what's there.
We already know.
Ignorance is bliss, but thanks.
I'd just like to mention again the Western Hills. it had asbestos. I think that was around $40,000 went from the Brownsfield into that project to determine there, and then a plan of action how to remediate that. But it is useful. Any other questions for Will? And is Ben Bowers on, or is he?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay. Ben, I don't know how much of the conversation you got, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
Unfortunately, I couldn't hear Will very well. I heard the council members during the process. Did Will talk about the Roosevelt Airport yet?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah, so right now it's kind of a wait and see with the open release. Currently for that, it's not eligible until it receives a no further action from the state. But I talked to a state project manager today, and it is in front of the committee for closure, and he's going to keep me up to date on that. And then once it does receive closure, then we could put the site in for the brownfields assessment process, or if the city needs any assistance with getting to closure, we could look at that as well. But we'll just have to wait on the airport until we hear back from the state. But I did hear you mention a city-owned property off of Main Street. Yes, anything that's currently owned by the city that's planned for possible redevelopment, that could be assessed. Any properties that the city wants to purchase, we could certainly do that, or any private entities that are looking to sell a property in the future, even if it's a couple years down the road, and they just want to know, may I come into an issue during a possible commercial transaction that I would like to know about ahead of time. This is where the brownfields dollars can come in and help out and do that look for you without any cost associated with that assessment.
Great. Thank you. And Scott and Kurt, that's probably something we could put on a item. Item is to take a look at that property and start filling out the paperwork to get that done. Yep. It sounds like the airport's probably going to be, by the time we're ready for that assessment, it's going to be past the time that be available. Who knows if they extend it? They did extend it once, didn't they?
Closure coming soon for the
Oh, okay.
airport. So
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
All right, next item, we have the resolution 2021-305. This is Roosevelt City fee schedule. Who would like to present that? Scott, you got this one? We have a room full, so everybody's going to know taxes are going up.
Last few months back, make sure we're in line. County and locals. Department heads went back, looked at all those schedules that they come up with compared to other cities, internal county, and the types of facilities up with based on those numbers from surrounding entities.
Kurt, can you get the fee schedule up here? I talked to Lee before the meeting to see if we could get the red line copy so that we can see what it was and what it's going to, what the changes were. I know as part of the process, in the department head meeting, I don't know, several months ago, Scott tasked each department to take a look at those fees that were related to their department and see if they were in line. And I know each individual department, at least a few of them, that I know for sure, went and did a lot of research to see and to compare and to bring our fees in line. I imagine most of them are being lowered, right? I'm just kidding.
One or two that were lower.
Nowadays, no, actually some did come. But a lot.
Sorry, Mayor, I was just gonna say, I was impressed because I went through all of it and noticed that I would say majority stayed the same. It was some of the things with like the golf course, a few things went up, some of the, extra recreational type things, a few of those went up, but majority of the things, if you went through, I mean, it wasn't wholesale, everything changed. It was just those that needed to be brought in line. So, and I appreciate the hard work that the department heads and you guys did in putting this together. So, right.
Can I just, can you, just hit the highlights, maybe some of the department heads, those things that are most, cool? Just say the ones that are going to be the biggest impact on our residents. So if there were any major changes, significant changes, Ryan? Surprise, surprise.
In the water, we left the culinary water alone. We're doing good there, but one department is the secondary water, and everybody knows that we've had secondary water for the last 4 or 5 years. We've been running in the red a little bit, so I got with Kurt and gave us the numbers of what we need to be steady. What we did is we left the usage rates the same. The difference is there's going to be a base rate. So that's the biggie. If you look to the left, the 1 inch, which is most of the residents, is going to be $6 a month. And 1.5 inches, it goes up from there. Most of those 1.5 to 6 inches, the churches and the schools and hospital and whatnot. So anyway, most of your we have about 750 connections that are about in that 1 inch area. So he gave us a number from $6 to $9, and we just decided to stick with 6 on the bottom end and see how we do. So our goal is to get more secondary out there, so it'll ease the burden, and that's what we have in the forecast. So this is probably the biggest change in this resolution that I'm aware of that's going to make a difference. So
Question. So have you looked at it like average user, kind of what their increase will be roughly? Just since I thousands. Yeah, about. Just wondering if significantly, or if it's just like $5-10 a month.
so
$6.
your usage is going to be the same. That doesn't change.
Okay.
So
So basically,
yep.
$6. Okay.
Yep. And I called, I shouldn't say just me. I had help with some of my department and others. We called 25 or 24 cities and try to get what they do with secondary. It's kind of a new big thing coming up that they're going to have them metered and everything. And it was a Heinz 57. It was all over the place on as far as what cities was doing. There's probably out of that 24, I think 4 of us that are kind of like this, that has a base rate with usage, and it seems to be more sound as far as consistency. easy to understand for the customer, and that's kind of what we wanted to, is if somebody has a question on a bill, we want them to understand how we're doing it. So, and it comes across more fair too. So anyhow, this is probably the biggest one.
Any other questions from the council on that? So just a thought for me, I mean, we've looked at the budget for several years, and it seems like secondary water has always been one that's, like you said, been running in the, and that's a really tough thing to raise rates, but at the same time, it's, we've got to make sure that we're paying for that infrastructure that's going on and the ongoing O&M for the lines, and then also bringing more of our city over to that. Doesn't make a lot of people want secondary water, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to continue to provide secondary water in our city if we're losing money at it. So it is a cheaper rate than culinary, but if it's not paying for itself, it's hard to justify continuing to install those lines and provide that service for our citizens. So that'll make us whole. Hard. Is there any other major changes in that fee schedule that would be noteworthy? We would want to make sure that Are there any other questions or concerns from the council on that? Seeing none, would entertain a
Motion to approve the new.
Second.
motion by Councilman Allen and second by Councilman Baird. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. I realize that I went out of order slightly. Do we have a representative from Aycock and Miles here? Perfect. Then I forgot him for a reason.
Now let's go with that.
Okay, we'll pick them up as soon as they get here. So we have the resolution 2021-306. This is sponsored by Councilman Baird. Do you want to go ahead and explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So we've had some interest from a few individuals in the community to do something to further protect our gun rights here in Roosevelt. And in talking with the city attorney, we drafted a resolution that would basically state that we agree with the laws, the Constitution. Could we put it up there? It's real simple. It's about a page long. It wouldn't really do anything to further protect our gun rights, but it would just state that we agree with the laws that are currently existing in the land, and that we, it states a few other things in there. Basically, it's an opinion in a way. It wouldn't, in fact,
We have Grant
if you don't
here.
mind taking a minute, he can explain. There's some implications of passing it either way. Whether we pass it or not, there's things to consider, and so I'm not 100% opinionated that this needs to be passed tonight, but I think it's something we need to talk about in an open meeting. And so if Grant will just talk about some of those things, then we can talk about it as a council and hopefully get some community input and decide whether we want to pass it or not.
Okay. In prior conversations with Dave, he had asked me, I think because of my position on it, to let everybody kind of know my personal position, which is something I don't normally do when I'm giving legal advice. I am a strong advocate of gun rights. I own a lot of firearms myself for a lot of different reasons. I've got some that have collector value, some that I use for hunting and other recreation, some that are heirlooms, and in total have over 100 in my own collection. The only reason I'm telling you that is because the advice I'm giving might seem like I have a different opinion than I actually do on guns. On sanctuary ordinances is kind of where this started, and my advice to Dave right off the bat was that I thought it was a bad idea. And it doesn't make very much sense if you understand how laws work, because the Constitution is the supreme law in the United States, and it has supremacy over any law that's passed which contradicts it. Now, a sanctuary ordinance from a municipality is really taking one of the lowest level laws and saying you're using that to protect the highest level law, and that's just not the way that the law works. And in my opinion, from a legal perspective, those things get in the way of the Constitution if it comes to a point that people are actually needing to defend their gun rights. And it gives people who are opposed to what my interpretation of gun rights are something that they can push back against and likely win in courts because it's the supremacy clause. And it gives people who have are anti-gun some momentum in the courts. And so I think it's something that should be avoided. When I told Dave about that, he changed from wanting me to draft a sanctuary ordinance to maybe doing a resolution where it's just stating the city's position. So that's what we drafted, but in spite of my best efforts to carefully craft language, I still don't think this is a good idea. I think that it's clutter and something that has the potential to do more harm than good. I think that the best practice is always just to rely on the Constitution itself. And if a time comes that gun rights are being threatened, to use that, not something like this. And there are some things that are a step down even from a resolution. There's proclamations, but really resolutions and proclamations don't really fit what this is saying. I think that the best fit is just something like a letter that as the council individually can either choose to join and sign together or not. And then the place this should really be directed would be to our federal legislators from Utah, passing it on to them, saying that whether it's all of you or just individuals on the council, saying this is, as a leader in Roosevelt City, this is what I believe should be our position on gun rights. And then that's on the federal level where they have the power and authority to change things in the Constitution if they see fit. So I don't disagree with anything that's being said in here, and in generally with sanctuary ordinances, what they're trying to accomplish is something that I like. But the mechanics of how it actually works, right, they're clutter in my opinion. And the National Rifle Association are the ones who kind of first started pushing sanctuary ordinances. And I agree with their reasoning behind it. They acknowledge that the approach is probably not sound legal practice. In fact, I wouldn't say not just probably. In the research that I did when I was working on this, I found multiple places that they've said that the value they see in this type of thing is symbolic. So it's not that they actually think that sanctuary ordinances, those kind of things would be upheld. In fact, I think that they recognize that if they were challenged, they would probably be struck down. But they like that it sends a message that communities are kind of united in the idea of want to protect these gun rights. As I already said, it can be a double-edged sword. The problem I see with that, I've already said, is that if it's challenged and struck down, I feel like there's momentum going the wrong direction. If this kind of thing is just contained in a letter to federal legislators, there's not that risk, but there's what you want. So I put quite a bit of time into it. Tried to take both sides into consideration, recognizing that there's also probably people in Roosevelt City, not just I'm sure there are people in Roosevelt City differently than I do about guns. I'm trying to be respectful of their feelings as well, while putting what I believe is the best interpretation of the Constitution.
So I have just, first of all, I'd just like to, this is we've heard the attorney's perspective. I do appreciate Dave Baird's us to hear the public and move forward with something and at least find out, at least get to this far. So I appreciate your efforts trying to bring forth something. This is a lady, there's at least a lady came one of our meetings, and I'm sure others have about it, you know, mentioning that UNA County had done a sanctuary resolution, or
Theirs was actually
and so, you know, I think that kind of caught a little fire. There were some that wanted to see that. So I appreciate the effort bringing it this far. I appreciate your input in providing your legal perspective. Is there any by the council?
So I want to just state right now that my position is pretty neutral on this as well, because it's neither here nor there. Whether we do it or not, it's not going to change the law at all. And just to kind of further validate what you said, I did call a friend of mine who's an attorney who actually is big into guns as well. And in my discussion with him, he basically said he could completely understand the position that you have, and he agrees with it pretty much agrees with it wholeheartedly. He doesn't feel like it puts the city in a bad position, but he doesn't feel like it puts the city in a...
And to be clear, I don't feel like it puts the city in a bad position.
Okay.
I just feel like it's the whole momentum thing we talked about in
Yeah.
the courts. I don't see liability in the
Right.
city. The worst thing that can happen, even if it was an ordinance, is that it's struck down. Be no other round.
And the only thing that he really commented that would make me think, oh, this is maybe a good thing, is that if his city had done it, and he lives in South Jordan, he said he'd be pretty excited just because it would demonstrate to him that his city is pro-gun rights. So really, that's all that this does, is if we were to pass it, would be to say that, hey, you know, we've done what we can, you know, but at the same time, as I said, I'm neutral on this. I think as long as we've discussed this in an open meeting and talked about it and heard what Grant's had to say, I feel like that's honestly good enough. But you know, how does the council and the citizens?
I like that.
Yeah, I like that too.
Any other comment?
Yeah, I agree with Vince.
Yeah, I agree too. I think that would be a good action item that would actually do something that would be worthwhile, maybe make it known to our legislators how we feel.
If you could draft the letter and then send it out to the council for review, then we could make any amendments to it or changes to it. Strongly about.
Right.
And I just want you to know, Grant, I really appreciate the work you did on this.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Dustin. The other Dustin. Mutt Die commemoration. So
for Roosevelt City. Some notable ones include adding new playground equipment to both the Constitution Park and Central Park, adding new baseball field lights to Field 5, a new outdoor volleyball pit, and bringing a new outdoor basketball facility with lights. Mutt was also very involved with the walking path that we now have around Constitution Park and the new aquatic center. Mutt was instrumental in the building of the new Parks and Recreation Department shop, as well as the new concession stand we have at Constitution Park. Some of his other accomplishments include the skate park, red mud run, and building of the soccer fields south of Constitution Park, and bringing in the Junior Jazz Youth Basketball program. He also made other notable improvements to Old Mill Park, 121 Park, Teddy Park. And that is just to name a few of the projects that Mutt was involved with since I started working for Mutt in Roosevelt City in 2002. I am sure there are countless other projects that made the parks of Roosevelt City what they are today. Mutt took great pride in his position and immaculately took care of the parks for Roosevelt City. To use a quote from the documentary about Michael Jordan called The Last Dance, Michael Jordan says, "Leadership has a price. So I pulled people along when they didn't want to be pulled. I challenged people when they did not want to be challenged. You ask all my teammates, the one thing about Michael Jordan was he never asked me to do something that he did not do." Mutt was a leader who pulled and challenged us all, even when we didn't want to be pulled and challenged. Mutt, like Michael Jordan, never asked us to do something he did not do. Even up to his time of retirement, was right in the middle of the projects we were working on. Whether it was fixing a major sprinkler line leak, repairing fields, mowing lawns, or whatever the task was. No one ever worked as hard as Mutt, and he never asked us to do something he did not do. Mutt's legacy lives on through each park in Roosevelt City in which he immaculately cared for. So just tonight, I'd like to, in recognition and appreciation for his service for Roosevelt City, have 3 proposals to be considered and discussed. Proposal number 1, in recognition and appreciation, I propose that we rename the baseball and softball field complex to the Lyndon Mutt Dye Ball Field Complex at Constitution Park with a bronze plaque. Proposal number 2, the new fourplex to be built be named the Lyndon Mutt Dye Ball Field Complex at Constitution Park, the bronze plaque. Or proposal number 3, install or add 3 recognition and appreciation bronze plaques with a photo be placed at Constitution Park, such as places like number 1, the south entryway to the baseball softball field complex, number 2, in playground and pavilion area at Constitution Park, and number 3, around the walking path. Just a few thoughts and ideas and proposals. That's what I would like to ask to be considered. Turn the time over. That's all I had. So.
Do we have any thoughts from the council? I have a, thank you,
Yeah,
Dustin.
thanks, Dustin.
Thank you. This is something we can take a minute to think on, or I don't know if council would have a suggestion for a decision tonight. The one thing that makes sense to me, I don't know about the new fourplex, but definitely the old fourplex is something that he worked on, something that he was always involved with. And that's where I remember Mutt Dye.
Right.
Men's softball and those fields right there. So I had to vote tonight, which I don't get a vote, but if I had to express my opinion, would be probably the number 1, just the current ball field, because that's where I remember seeing Mutt. And
There, just a question, and I love Mutt, so it's not a problem for me personally, but do we have policy for the city for this type of thing? I just don't want to go against it if we have a policy for doing this. I don't know of a lot of places that have been named. I'm sure there are, I just can't think of any off the top of my head.
We've gone to a lot of ball fields and tournaments that are named after people. It seems to be a pretty
I
common
understand
thing.
other places.
I
I'm saying for
yeah.
Roosevelt City, is there anything contrary to, in our code, policy, anything that would preclude us, I guess? I'm happy to do it. I just don't want to do it and then find out afterwards there was a problem. Does
That's a
that make-
question for our city attorney.
So would it be better to wait till the ordinance is crafted, or does it matter? Okay. 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 That's all, that was my only concern. Thank you.
Any other thoughts by the council?
I like the number one proposal too.
You had your hand up. So, any other comment from the? So my question was specifically starting with Dustin and what would be your? Does anybody like to propose a motion?
I'll move that we go forward with this and do proposal one, recommendation one from Dustin on the old ball field at Constitution Park and rename it. I think that's great.
And the second by Councilman Allen. All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Thanks, Dustin. That was
And
a
I'm
good.
glad Grant was here.
good guy.
Like I said, I don't mind doing it. I just didn't want to do it and find out it was an issue, you know.
Sure. Always good to.
Just wanted to check.
Let's see. Let's move on to. We have Chief Lee Rockwood with us tonight. You got the fire statistics.
Hmm.
in UNT County went up 225%. Not in Dollar City.
Thank you.
Actually, I just want to say, I would put our fire department against any fire department.
Yeah.
And he does a great job. do a great job. They're trained, professional, and I don't think anybody, unless you've been a firefighter, you don't really realize what it's like to have the pager go off at 3 in the morning, and your heart goes from 56 beats a minute to 156 beats a minute, and you're doing all you can to get to the station, and it ends up being alarm. But even though they may anticipate that, they treat that the same as any other call. And I've been on the fire department, not a long time, 5 years is all, but long enough to know what it's like, and these guys do an excellent job.
Yeah.
Good. Statistics. You know what? Let's go ahead where you're up, Alan, and then we'll, if that's okay. He'll be quick. Total calls for service, 12. That's a. And how many officers do we have? Any questions for Interim Chief Tucker?
No, thanks for your service.
For sharing them.
Thank you. All right, Cameron, we'll turn the time over to you. You've got way more paper in your hand. I like to see. Are we going to read that tonight?
I already printed mine. I don't need a copy. I don't need one. Just give it to
We
those
definitely
two.
won't hit every page on there. And if we can just start with page 19. Go there.
Fiscal audit.
The stapled paper beat the electronic this time, huh? And we can get you some bound copies of the audit. Just a bit of miscommunication today led for our tardiness, so we apologize for that as well. Page 19, looking at the general fund, is the one we want to spend our time at. And we're not going to, even though Ryan wants us to, we're not going to go through every line. So sorry about that. But this is looking at your taxes. Property taxes of 1.1 the fiscal year. Sales tax was 2.6 million. And you won't see it there, but I just kind of jotted it down. That was a small decrease, not very much. The prior year was 2 point. So $200,000 decrease in sales tax revenue. Definitely would classify in the ebb and flow of business. Other taxes, $635,000. That had a small decrease. The prior year was it was at $698,000. This year being $635,812. The other licenses and permits and intergovernmental revenues of $701,000. That was similar to the prior year. Charges for services, $1.5 million. The year before it was $1.6 million. So $100,000 decrease there. And then fines and interest and miscellaneous revenue was very much the same. Come to total revenues for the general fund of $7,089,301, and total revenues was $7.3 million last year. So you had about about $210,000 decrease in revenue. Looking at your expenditures, general government was $704, public safety just a little 2.1 million. And the prior year, that was 1.9, a little bit of increase there. Highway and public improvements was 417, 182,000 spent in the airport, and all the others were pretty much the same. So your total expenditures was 5,749,000, and the prior year was 5,406,000. So about a $300,000 increase in expenditures. But revenues exceeded expenses by, you look at that next line of 1,339,879, and then where there are some transfers down below, section below, those are just to keep you within state guidelines out of the general fund there. Capital projects, you see the big number there, 7.9 million. That was the airport revenue, federal money received for the airport, majority of that. And because you received so much, it required us to do a single audit. So a single audit, you had one last year, and so this is the second year in a row. A single audit is looking at the federal revenues and proper spending of the federal revenues. There's going to be a lot of those probably to come in coming years as well. But it's additional testing that we're required to do and make sure there's proper approvals. And, glad to report everything looked really well on all of that addition. So, looking at the general fund, capital projects fund, any questions there on the revenue expense? If not, let's go to page 23. Good there. And we'll look at the enterprise funds, the water and sewer fund. Yeah, page 23. Right there. So you see on the water fund, charges for sales and services was 2.8 million. And then you had connection fees of 26 and operating income of 93. So your total operating income in the water fund was 2,934,000. The prior year, which you don't see up there, was 2,834,000. So you saw a $100,000 decrease in water revenue for the year. Not very much, relatively speaking. Looking at expenses, your total operating expenses were pretty much down the line, pretty much similar in those categories. So you had 2,731,000 in expenses. The prior year was 2,882,000. So you decreased expenses by 150,000. And majority of that was in decrease in other supplies and expenses. But it was still, that was the biggest. So not very much. Impact fees. So net operating income up there, you see 202,000. You had impact fees of 62,000 along with some interest income and some capital contributions of 5,746. So the change in the water fund was a positive 268,904. Let's jump back up real quick, if we could, Kurt, to the sewer. Sewer revenue was 1,013,000. Prior year was 1,010,000. So right on line. Sewer expenditures of 855,000. Prior year was 866,000. So again, steady as she goes. So total net operating income 157,817. Then you had some impact fees, miscellaneous income there. That's some revenue off of right-of-way agreements of 127,000. And going down to that bottom line there, change in net position that's bolded was a positive 295,000. So really good and exciting stuff. I can tell it. I can feel it.
This is what I came for tonight.
Yeah. I'll just, if we go over one more page, Kurt, to page 24. And this is just the cash flow. We won't go through any of the lines other than just kind of point out that first section there, cash from our operating activities. This is, is the cash coming in for these enterprise funds self-sustaining the system? Or is it paying for itself for the existing system? And, it's good to report solid numbers there. See that 957,868 in the operating activities. That's for the water fund, 581,002 sewer fund. So good, strong, positive cash flow. Cash flow that's maintaining the system that you're going to have in place. We'll jump to page 35, and this right here just shows the change in capital assets for the governmental fund on page 35. And we won't go, it's highly summarized, so you're not going to see a lot of the individual detail there, but it'll just give you an idea on it. There we go. 5. So you see governmental activities, construction progress, that fourth line down, began the year at 1.6, and there was 7 million added. Most of that was that airport work at the airport, revenues there. And you go down to the next section, you can see buildings, city buildings of 100,000 was an addition, 1.6 million in improvements other than buildings. Most of that is streets, various road improvement projects that were completed during the year. Machinery and equipment, 255,000. That was the big ticket item on that was a new street sweeper, and then some additional infrastructure, that was there, 573,000. So 2.5 million added in additional new assets. And then the third section, there's the accumulated depreciation, the estimated useful life of it, and we won't do that, but that's what that is. And the bottom section breaks it out by various departments. So page 36 is the same for capital assets for the water and sewer fund. And you know, we won't go through any of those numbers there. Just some water line extensions for the year. That you see that 409,160 under additions for water system. That was the big ticket, big change that year for this year. So, let's look at page 37. And this is just looking at the long-term debt for the city. Governmental activities of 2,300,000 total long-term debt of 2.3 million. Maybe scroll down just a little bit. You can see the bold right there. During the year, there was no new debt added. There was payments of 666,000, and so 1,695,000 was the ending balances.
Can we change that number, Kurt? Add 1,000 to that.
Yeah.
It's going to be a bad year. That's what happened last year. Sorry, Cameron, go ahead.
Okay. Page 38 looks at the water and sewer fund, the liabilities there, the long-term debt. The beginning balance was $5,817,000. Began the year, $384,000 was paid, and so if you go down to the bottom bolded line, you can see that there was $5,433,000 left to pay, and you can see it's the next graph down there. You see 2021, 2022, 2023. You can see that it's quite steady. The debt payments upcoming. Steady as she goes, I guess, on that. Before additional things, any questions that anybody may have or anything? The audit went really well. Each time we do the audit, we look at internal control, see if proper approvals, purchasing policies are being followed. We'll take samples of, expenditures. We'll take large ticket items and small ones, and we'll check those things, and everything looked really well. With the transition that took place in the city's finance department, everything looked really well. So her did an excellent job in everything we tested. We also have to test, and there's these letters at the back, which we won't go through. But state compliance, various state compliance laws and categories that they have there, and which was really good to see. There was no findings, even with some of the changes that the state auditor's office had put in place. So that went really. If that, now that everyone's ready for me to be done, I will end. If there's no additional questions.
Thank you, and thanks to Kurt as well. Yeah. Everyone else involved.
Thanks, Cameron. We'll keep Kurt around at least one more year.
Well, thank you.
Have a great night. Wow. JUB Airport Engineering Services. Who's presenting that for us tonight? JUB is our airport engineers. Okay.
Is a agreement of professional services. That up. This is for your 5-year capital report. It's just us entering you with G. Requires your signature.
Is there a
The
the price shown, sorry, the price on that should not exceed.
That's what I was going to ask. JUB, from Inspectors done a fantastic about 7 years ago. And since they've taken over that responsibility, they've done a phenomenal in helping us get that $7.4 million federal grant that you just saw in our budget, helping us move those projects along out. Work with. My recommendation would be to continue with JUB. Seeing none, entertain a motion.
Motion 4.
Okay, we have a motion to continue engineering services.
Councilman
JUB
Baird.
by Councilman Baird. We have a second by Councilman Riley Fink.
I didn't know if you caught
To
that.
make you the vice mayor
Yeah. Just trying to move it along.
by Councilman Mayor.
I got a class tonight, I told you.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's funny. You should see when he doesn't have a class.
I know. I
Then
can
we're
talk,
here for
talk for
just-
hours.
I like it when he has a
Oh,
class.
Ryan, I can talk for hours.
Next is the airport hangar door bid discussion. Who's going to present that? Kirby will. That you?
So hopefully you guys have in your packets here, chance to look them over. Previously, we had come in and had approval for, I believe, company. After further along the lines of any kind of installation or removal is a big jump in price, and them being from Harvard, Illinois was another big concern, and costs would have been up tremendous, close to 60,000 or more. So went ahead and got some more bids, a couple of local, as I say local, within the state. And as you can see, the Western, go to that one, Kurt. And this is with installation, which increased to $62,905. After looking further, and I come across a company called Powerlift out of Salt Lake, and their cost, as you can see there, $34,537. That's with removal of the old hangar door and installation, basically A to Z. So I'm here to ask from the $28,000 to be paid to the $34,000, but with a lot more being money.
Okay, really quickly, can I?
Yes.
Let's slow this down.
Okay, go ahead.
No, really, and only because I want to make sure that we get the price right, and I would probably throw in a contingency in there and maybe approve 38,000 or something, just in case there's a few odds and ends, so that it doesn't have to come back before council. So my recommendation would be for the council to approve the 38 or 40,000, not to exceed that, to award the bid. So that's how I would formulate that motion, just so we're covered.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And if I don't say their names, Lee, are you going to be able to? Okay, perfect. Then I'll cut that. We'll cut that out.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Kirby.
Kirby. That's was fortunate, especially where they're a local company. Next, we're going to flip these ones. Talk about the animal shelter first, and then we'll move on to the chief of police discussion and appointment. So just to be brief in history, it was August. We do have a report from UNA County and their findings and or opinion and summarization of their investigation at the animal shelter. To summarize very briefly, in August, it came to the attention of myself, our interim city manager at the time, Ryan Claiborne, and a few of us, that there were issues at the animal shelter. We met with a group at that time. Several that are here were in that meeting. In that meeting, we found that there was, as this alludes to a mess, as it relates to the administrative functions, policies, and procedures of the animal shelter. There was lack of oversight and inadequacies on Roosevelt City's part, and lack of expectations and/or policies and procedures. We knew going into that investigation that those would be found. One of the things we wanted to make sure, and it was, we felt duty, based on state law, was to do an investigation to make sure that there was no further findings or problems that we were not aware of. Fortunately, that investigation took way longer than anybody ever anticipated, and their findings were exactly what we basically already knew. So nothing new other than their opinion and information regarding that. So what that means is there are no charges filed at this time on either side. Again, it was a lack of oversight and situation that was allowed to continue for quite some time that needed to be addressed and fixed. Again, unfortunately, it took 3 months to get professional opinion back, something that was required of us to do our due diligence. Moving forward, this will be, I assume there are some inaccuracies in this document, but because we didn't want to take the extra time to try to sort those out, as we didn't feel like it was something that was going to change the outcome, we decided just to bite the bullet and move, get moving on that. It's way past time to start moving forward on that. Moving forward, there will be changes again in our policy procedures. There's going to be well, first of all, Grant, do you want to add anything to that before we kind of move forward up from a legal perspective? Okay. So, what we can expect moving forward, we will not be staffed the same. There will be reduction in force, but so there were 7 to 9 employees there. We feel an adequate amount of employees there, full-time, or not full-time, but employees would be 5. So there's going to be a reduction in force there. Those that have been on administrative leave, there may be a few of you that will be asked to come back based on tenure, based on merit, and then we'll put that back together and move forward. Again, we're working on the policies and the procedures. There will not be, we will still have contracts with rescues, but we will not have a rescue working in the same facility. That was one of the things that they mentioned. That was not a real good idea to mix a private public entity like that and commingle those, or whether it's just appearance or any other thing, it's just not a great idea. And that was Roosevelt's failure to see that conflict, take care of that early on. We're doing that now, and again, it's painful and hard, but was also one of the suggestions is that that not be allowed to take. So those two will be completely separate moving forward. And yes, with that, I know we have several from that have worked with the animal shelter. Do you have any questions for us? Excuse me. Let me do this. If you have a question, if you'll come to the podium, state your name for the record. Yes, thank you.
So, my name is Autumn Tilson. I have been on bed rest since June. I got off maternity leave in October and have not heard anything back about my job. I've not been able to go back to work, and due to COVID, we have been struggling at home. And it'd be nice to get some answers, because I really do love my job. And it hurts me that I can't be up there working and helping with the facility. And I don't understand why nobody's contacted me at all. Nobody's told me I'm on administrative leave. Nobody's told me I can go back to work. I've heard nothing.
I have no idea.
Everybody else contacted me and told me that they were on administrative leave and that my other 3 coworkers, with one running the place into the ground, and they have no information for me either.
So what you're explaining to me is exactly what we've identified. I have no idea I assume that you may have been on the records of Roosevelt as an employee.
I came down here with paperwork for Medicaid because I've been struggling so much at home and nobody mentioned anything to me either. And I was here at the end of October, beginning of November, to have that paperwork filed by Randy. Nobody said anything to me. I asked if I was going to be able to go back to work, and he said he didn't know.
And he didn't know, to
Well,
be
he
completely
wouldn't
honest.
know because he's,
Yeah.
you know.
Because I didn't even know.
It just has been really stressing me out. I have a 5-month-old at home and a 3-year-old, and trying to be able to pay my bills, that little extra always has helped. Part-time, full-time, that part-time still helps.
We feel you. We
Having
understand.
to ask help from the government is a really low step for me as a new adult.
And we apologize for your circumstances. Again, it's not an easy. It hasn't been an easy for anybody, and especially
No.
those that have been directly affected. This is the process that was suggested that is suggested, and
I tried to get in contact with somebody and nobody got back to me.
which again shows the lack of communication that existed there, and which will not happen in
I
the future.
do have
So-
one altercation you guys should change, is that a teenager definitely should not be running that place. Granted, she is technically an adult, but teenager nonetheless.
Well, we have
I go
oversight.
up there and there's
Sean,
never anybody up there when there's somebody supposed to be up there.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so let's just go through it a little bit. So it talks about the relationship between Forever Buddies and the animal shelter. We knew when we met that day that there was some concerns with how those two had intertwined to the point where it was very difficult to tell the difference, especially particularly with the public, the difference between the one and the other. There was also potential for, other issues, and they alluded to that. So we'll talk about that. So it says, basically in their findings, first of all, the question was to make sure, the thing that we didn't know was whether or not public funds were being misused. That's why the investigation had to happen. Most everything else, we knew that there wasn't a strict line and division between the shelter and rescue. We identified that in that meeting. That's when, you remember, I mentioned there has to be specific policies and procedures to make sure that each one knows their role and those roles are separate. And so beyond that, where the investigation came in was to make sure that there was no misuse of public funds and or property for a private entity, because that was a concern that was brought up by some members of the public. That's why the investigation took place. So this says, is it okay to read this? Because it's going to be... So describing that situation, it states here, and this is their opinion, we can definitely say that is that Roosevelt City has created a situation that is confusing and full of difficulties. In other words, a mess. When Roosevelt City hired Mrs. Stevenson, it was fully aware she was the director of a nonprofit, which would work closely with the shelter. According to Ms. Stevenson's statement, the reason she was hired by Roosevelt City was precisely because she was the manager of Forever Buddies. That was a mistake Roosevelt City made right in the beginning. By hiring someone from an interested organization and allowing that organization to intertwine itself so directly with the problems of the city, Roosevelt has created a potential for problems. We have 3 witnesses who state they conducted or saw property of the rescue at the shelter. This appears to have been standard practice for quite a few years, and according to the evidence we have and statements from Mrs. Stevenson, Chief Harrison knew this was happening. It was not correct, although he knew it was happening. So it says that he was not interviewed, which I don't think is a fair assessment, or he should have been interviewed and asked, but regardless, the only further evidence we have is that Mrs. Stevenson states she never had access to the budget. So there's a few things there. Obviously, we talked about that in that meeting, how she should have been everything else. One of the issues, obviously, was budget being over almost $50,000. Just why Roosevelt City allowed the shelter to go so far in arrears, at $50,000, without requiring any restraint or any explanation from the director or manager of the shelter, the very person who spent the monies is also unknown. So the record of the shelter merely shows monies were paid out on certain animals, how many different animals. So their records don't show and don't clarify a lot of where even those monies were. They do say it is troubling that Mrs. Stevenson could conduct business for her nonprofit at the shelter. The workings of the shelter and rescue were so intermingled that they appear to be one and the same. We cannot agree with Mrs. Stevenson's statement that she can work both and knows when she is acting for one or the other. To represent various entities which are engaged in similar work is not possible. It is almost impossible to define the success of one without the other providing the benefit. Although we have been hard-pressed to find any legal violations, the entire situation is ripe for potential illegal conduct, not to mention the ethical concerns which, although not illegal, potential to erode public and taxpayers. Although they were not part of the record, the financial records of the rescue would be an important piece of evidence. There appeared to be funds raised by rescue to pay for the veterinary bills of a certain dog, Cadence, after Roosevelt paid for those bills. This is true. There are Cadence.
Yeah, got it switched for everybody.
Okay, what I'm saying, here's what I'm saying. We also found some incorrect statements in this. We found that this is not 100% correct. So I don't disagree that there was some. But what I'm trying to allude to is the situation was a poor situation. It was poor that you got put in that situation. It was poor that there was lack of oversight of that situation. It was unfortunate that it had to come to this to resolve the situation. For me, I'm very frustrated that this report is, and I hate to say it on record, but I'm going to anyway, as incomplete as it is and has the inaccuracies that you've identified and we've identified, and we've waited 3 months or 4 or 5 months for this. It was ridiculous. It was something that should have been done in 2 weeks to 3 weeks, which is totally unfortunate for you for Roosevelt City and for Roosevelt citizens. Hindsight, we probably could have got a different entity to come in and look at it, somebody that would have completed that more thoroughly. But that's, and then I'll just finish with this and then their conclusion. Although there does not appear to be a violation of Utah State Code, there does appear to be violations, or Code 768402, there does appear to be violations of Utah Code 1146103 and Roosevelt City Code 624030 entitled Stray Animals and Disposition of Animals, respectively. And I'm not going to read that here. You guys can read that because I don't want it to throw anyone under the bus. But long story short, although this is the conclusion, I think this sums it up pretty well. Although the activities Ms. Stevenson and Forever Buddies rescues do not appear to violate Utah Code concerning the misuse of public funds, it's apparent that the lax oversight of the shelter by Roosevelt City has created the current problem, which is our responsibility. The shelter and rescue have been able to blur the lines of independence to the point where they act as one and the same. The concerns and questions asked by the public about the animal shelter are merited. It is our recommendation that Roosevelt City put into place policies and procedures that will allow the shelter to operate without its dependency
rescue. Like, as far as however that time comes up.
to continue what we have been doing. We have contracts with shelters. Forever Buddies we would still contract with. It would be treated just like any other rescue. We would have contracts with those rescues so that those animals were placed in those rescues. Sure.
My name's Charlie. Just wondering if Roosevelt City has any, what they're going to do that they put on leave with 5 months.
That's a good question. You want to? You know what? That's a good question. Like I said, we will look at reinstating employees. I know your question has been in the past whether or not they'll get back pay. At the moment, I don't know that would happen. I don't know, unless there's a strong feeling one or the other with the council. Usually, in discussing this earlier, knowing this topic was going to come up, especially for part-time, it's really hard to tell how many hours they would have had, types of things. With the shelter already being overstaffed, that's another difficult thing. As I looked at it, and I mentioned this when Rose and Melissa came into the meeting when this all began, we were looking at the hours and things like that. One thing as a business owner that I immediately recognized is if you have 7 to 9 employees, but you only have a small limited amount of hours that those employees can work, you're going to have a tendency, because those employees want to be at the shelter, they want to be with the animals, there is going to be a tendency to go over it, that hours naturally. I feel like from a business standpoint, I would rather give smaller number of employees more hours so that they could actually have that to benefit them and their family in a way that would be worth it to come down. I mean, to come down and work 2 or 3 hours or 5 hours a week is not adequate for some. So there will be a reduction in force as far as back paying those employees. Would have to say, unless somebody feels strongly that that's probably not.
Anybody?
Well, honestly, I feel that because Roosevelt assumed some of the blame on this. I mean, as a council member of the community, I mean, I feel somebody lost, basically missed those opportunities they had, and that they had been depending on. If it is Roosevelt City's fault to a degree, I think that there's a station that should be involved. So been done, but I mean, obviously we have to. I would personally think that it should be negotiated in a way that's fair for everyone, because it wasn't something that you guys really wanted, and it wasn't something we really just what I'm saying. I think that it's fair to give a little bit of money what they have worked historically. That's just my opinion.
And I see where you're coming from. I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's a unique and tough situation. It's hard to set a precedence too, but also I hope this never happens in the future. We don't have to be in this situation. So for me, it's see it both ways. But you have Grant or Scott, do you have any thoughts on that? I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. I just
Some of these. What those numbers are. We use a 6 month, see how many the average hours. See what those hours are. Don't know what's going to be. So when we get down to the nitty-gritty, and what is not going to be other. So past employees are not entirely. They are part-time. That they could have as low as 2 hours. Quantify load for the they've been off. Wouldn't even know where to start with that. That when it sitting down doing that, I do agree it's a precedent set because there's a difference between a part certain merit protection. Meaning if you go on administrative leave, you're paid administrative leave, you're off. Right. If I'm wrong, go down that way, saying, well, that would be my step for me is not separating what part is. They do not.
let's let Grant.
Then when the investigation was sympathetic to something comes
Mhm.
Always try to be careful. Ordinance. I'm not telling you.
And thanks, Grant. That's why my comment was what it was, is because after having these conversations, it wasn't that I'm unsympathetic of what has happened. It was, again, we're in between a rock and a hard spot. So
I would defer to what the administration would do, but my thought is that there's people here that decisions that were outside of their control that were made affect to a degree that, you know, to a certain degree, and I think we bear some of that responsibility. So that it's fair to compensate those people that had no, just a fair compensation. But like I said, I mean, that's just my personal opinion. You can take it for what it's worth, but it's up to you and the mayor.
can I ask a question
just
on
say-
that?
I just want to go on record to say I
Real-
agree with
real-
Councilman Barry. That's all I wanted to say.
And the question that I would have with that is those that potentially would be brought back as employees, could they be compensated back pay? And then the ones that, I don't know, that could, or would it be all or nothing? How does that work?
Yeah. But one of the things. Tough.
And I would just say that the mayor is full and actually supervisor of the city manager. So I think the mayor has a lot of say in this one.
And for me personally, I have to be honest and say I wouldn't be able to make that decision right now. I'd have to look at it and see, you know, I don't think that would be fair to make a decision right now, because I am sympathetic to the employees. However, I like to make sure that we're doing things fairly and equitably for anybody else that comes into this position. So we don't want to set precedences. We don't want to, as our city managers mentioned, for part-time employees, those types of things. There's more moving here than just one or two things. So maybe what we'll do is we'll sit down with the city manager again, look it over, city attorney, and if you'll allow us nation, and then if we get it right, you won't hear about it again. Get it wrong, maybe we'll be having this discussion in 2 weeks. I don't know. But anyway, so that's basically the update on the shelter. Moving forward, the investigation in my mind is done. Again, we both have recognized there are some. Sure. Do you want to You really have to speak in that mic then.
I just, I'm gonna do it without, I'm gonna get emotional. I wish that you guys knew what I did there for several years. And as far as the budget going, I told Chief I wasn't gonna pay for it anymore. I was paying. I have several people that said you can ask him. I paid for every animal. 2018, and Snow told me to start breaking it up, and so I did. Chief said, "Why is this going up?" I said, "I'm not going to keep paying for it." And he said, "No, I don't blame you. You don't need to pay for it." I always thought it was okay. Anyways, as far as the back pay, thank you. I think you guys need to help. They're seeing the other side of it. My husband worked every day on his day off. He's taken out his 401k. So I've been waiting to see what was going to defend myself a little.
Well, listen, as far as the animals are concerned, I think you did a great job, with the rescue. And that's, again, part of the reason I'm glad that Ryan Snow told you to stop paying for that, so that we could see what the actual budget for that would be, and then we can plan for that in the future. That's something we also talked about in that meeting, is that if we don't know, then how do we incorporate it in the budget? And if we had to separate lines. I think the most fair thing would be to do at this point, obviously, so we'll be looking at staffing again quickly and getting that up and running again. We'll look at making sure that those policies are put in place and your SOPs are put in place, and that'll be ran much more efficiently and according to policy and procedure. As far as the back pay, I think it's fair to say we'll look at that, and we'll touch base with especially the two councilmen that have voiced their opinions on that, and working with them and moving forward. And for me, this is hard, but I'm just glad it's at the end, and we're at a point that we can move forward and get past this. It's been tough for everyone, and especially you all. So. Okay. Great. All right. Anything else on that? Because Councilman Busenbark is on a tight schedule. Well, and you make a good point, and that was part of our concern when we started to see some of the things on Facebook to begin with, is that it was painting the shelter in a light that was negative and would foster those types of ideas. And so moving forward, I think the first thing that we need to do is get somebody in there that will bring the shelter, raise the shelter up to the level that it needs to be as far as promoting trust with the public and everything else. And that's going to be the responsibility of the one that gets hired, the manager that gets hired, the person in charge there to do. From there on out, it needs to be clear to the public that the care, maybe, the care has been difficult because we only have 3 employees. That'll improve, and the work schedule will be worked out to where there is adequate time and take care of those animals the way they should be treated. We've already looked at our budget a little bit. with the vet bills and things like that, and increasing that somewhat. But our main focus, and we talked about this in our other meeting with Rose and Melissa, was to make sure that our people are trained better so that those animals can get the care in-house and not necessarily have to use the vet on every single thing. So we want to make sure that we're training our people to be able to administer vaccines. If we have to euthanize, they can euthanize, and they'll be trained adequately in their job so that that care is there. And then if we have to use the vet, we'll use the vet. But so those things are going to be put in place. And believe me, we will not, at least from the administrative side and the perception side, we want to build that. And we want to make sure the shelter is something that people are comfortable with and pleased with. And I don't want to have this discussion in 6 months or a year from now. So I'm not going to stop. We're not going to stop until it's done, and it's done right, and it's been. Unfortunately, we would have been done, I think, with this already had the investigation come back 4.5 months ago. It'll be released either tonight or first thing in the morning. So, thank you. Yes. Well, yeah. And you're absolutely right on two points. First of all, the shelter, it's not the responsibility of the shelter to take animals to homes and those types of things. That's a rescue thing, and that's where the intermingling comes into play. The rescue is, or the shelter is going to be a shelter. We will contract with people, volunteers, and those types of things to provide rescue type services, caring for animals in their homes, those types of things. What do you call those? Foster homes. So we will make, that's one of the things that we want to foster in the future, is making sure that we have people that can do that from a volunteer standpoint, and not have employees necessarily doing that, but volunteers doing that. And we've had several people come to us and say, hey, if you need us to do those types of things, we're ready and willing. So that's the first thing. Second thing, we've had 5-6 months now of paying for all the vet bills and everything else, Roosevelt City, for everybody. So that doesn't give us a full year, obviously, but that gives us a really good indication of where we're at. And where are we at on that vet bill budget right now, Kurt? So to give you an idea, we're month 7 in our budget year, and we've spent 60% of our budget. Yeah, so our budget is looking close. We may have to increase that a little more for next year, but where we have been taking care of those animals 100% strictly in Roosevelt City for the past 5 months, we're seeing that trend. And so that's a good point, but we are looking at that and making sure in June, July, we'll look at our expenditures and then reallocate and budget in the future. That was one of the things that we knew we had to do. Is last budget, when I saw it, I think it was $2,000 for vet bills, and that's just not real. That's just not reality. But yeah. Thanks, Rose. All right. I almost don't dare ask the question, but I'm just kidding. Is there anything else? And we will be contacting a few of you, I imagine, and then we'll look at that and work with some of the councilmen to see what would be in that. We did, and quite a bit. So we'll see what we can come up with. Anything else? Okay. Thank you for being here tonight and appreciate the comments. We're on to the chief of police discussion and possible appointment. So we have narrowed down the pool to 4 candidates, and I'll be completely honest. I feel like the candidates that we've had for our police chief were phenomenal. We continue to get candidates still, so I think we're going to shut that off. But we narrowed it down from at least 45. I'd say, dare say 45 by now, because we just keep getting more candidates to 4. And so my intent tonight would have been happy to come with the one that I felt the strongest about for the consideration. However, because the top 4 were so close in the way they scored, but for different reasons, wanted to have a closed session with the council and the council only to talk about, and the reason is because we're going to be talking about their character, we're going to be talking about their pros, their cons, and that can be a little embarrassing for some when we're mentioning all their flaws, their goods and their bads. And so wanted to just take a minute, if we could, and move into closed session and talk about that. I have some leanings toward 2, but don't want to count any of them out, and would like to just discuss that and to be able to bring up those pros and cons, maybe some of the concerns, and then move back into open session and probably make.
We move to closed session, discuss the police chief and for discussion, and then move back into open session afterwards.
And are we good to do that where it's competency and character? Okay. All right. We have a motion and a second. Let's do roll call. Councilman Riley? You want it aye or nay? Yay or nay? Councilman White? Councilman Busenbark?
Okay.
Councilman Baird?
Yes.
Councilman Allen? All right. Let's do a just a couple minute recess.